Hello, and thank you very much for coming along once again. Today, we're going to be looking at a crisis of international leadership on questions that face humanity as a whole. This isn't just a question of leadership in any one country or any one kind of leadership within a country. It's the question of leadership in general that we're going to be looking at, and in the particular ways in which it's acting or not acting in reference to the greatest crisis facing humanity at this point. And that's what we want to focus on in looking at the lawmakers and the laws of nature. Can the human community survive its public leadership in the 21st century? It's not at all clear that we can survive our leadership unless we change our leadership in some rather dramatic ways, because our leadership is generating a followership that is driving humanity over the brink in many different aspects of human life. We saw this in the news as our own president in the United States visited the devastation wrought by one of the most powerful hurricanes ever to hit the mainland part of the United States, in this case, the Florida Panhandle. Take a look.
All across the Florida Panhandle, the long slog to recovery is underway in the wake of Hurricane Michael. The death toll stands at 17, and many survivors have no power in their homes, or far worse, no home at all. President Trump got a first-hand look today, as William Brangham reports.
For nearly an hour, the president flew over a land laid waste along the Florida Gulf Coast. Tiny Mexico Beach was left in ruins by winds blasting 155 miles an hour and a storm surge that towered 14 feet. Later, the president visited the town of Lynn Haven, marveling at what he had seen.
These massive trees are just ripped out of the earth. We've seen mostly water, and water can be very damaging and horrible and scary. You know, we have, when you see water rising 14, 15 feet, but nobody's seen anything like this. This is really incredible.
The president also promised federal help in rebuilding, and he praised the response so far.
Everybody has been incredible. FEMA and first responders, everybody, law enforcement. It's incredible with the power of the storm.
Back on Mexico Beach, rescue teams and search dogs spent the weekend combing through destroyed homes for any signs of life. Today, the number of missing there dropped to just 46.
We haven't had cell phone service in a couple days now, and no power, no internet, no way to connect with people other than walking around trying to find people. But this is unbelievable. This storm was, catastrophic's not even the word for it.
In some isolated areas, people are trying other means of communication. One homeowner in Bay County, Florida, used logs to spell out their plea for help. Some 17,000 utility workers are trying to restore power, and an additional 2,000 are working to restore cell service. But thousands could be waiting at least another week for the lights to come back on. Meanwhile, many are trying to figure out what to do next.
I lost everything. I lost my clothes, I lost everything. Wallet, credit, everything. I am in zero. I gotta start from zero.
All over the Panhandle, food and water remain scarce, and people are standing in lines to get basic supplies. Even well inland, the storm's fierce winds knocked down thousands of trees and damaged countless buildings. The president saw some of that damage today as he flew from the Florida coast and into Georgia. Last night, he declared a federal emergency in the state, and the National Guard is already distributing water and other aid. All of this as Hurricane Michael's explosive power has generated new alarm about climate change supercharging these storms. On 60 Minutes last night, the president said he no longer views climate change as a hoax, but he also expressed some ideas that are at odds with the facts.
I don't think it's a hoax. I think there's probably a difference, but I don't know that it's man-made. I think something's happening, something's changing, and it'll change back again.
Last November, the federal government's own climate report confirmed the consensus view that humans are driving the rise in global temperatures, saying, quote, "There's no convincing alternative explanation." The report also dismissed the idea of temperatures cooling again. Instead, it said they are only going up, including, quote, "more record-setting extremes."
You have to show me the scientists.
But last night, the president also said he thinks many scientists have a political agenda. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm William Brangham.
Well, it's pretty extraordinary when he's accusing the scientists of having a political agenda, and his own political agenda has made him blind to the reports of the scientists. What's more important is that we look at the full extent of Hurricane Michael for a moment. It not only affected the United States, but all of Central America. Take a look.
Heavy rains from Hurricane Michael have caused floods and landslides, killing 12 people in just a few days in Central America. According to rescue and emergency authorities, the downpours that began on Thursday battered countries from Guatemala to Costa Rica and caused a landslide in Honduras that killed 2 children and their mother while they were sleeping. The rain destroyed houses and crops and forced thousands to leave their homes for temporary shelters. Local authorities in Honduras said 7,000 people were affected and 3,200 had to evacuate their homes. Over in Nicaragua, the government reported 23,000 people were affected by the hurricane, and a fisherman was killed after his boat overturned. Two other people drowned in a river. The head of El Salvador's Civil Protection Agency said 2 people had been killed. 1 person died in Costa Rica and a child is missing in Guatemala.
All over Central America, Nicaragua among other places. And you can follow it, in fact, if you're at all attentive to international
Hurricane
news.
Michael has brought strong winds and heavy rainfall to western Cuba and is now set to strengthen as it makes its way across the Gulf of Mexico towards the US.
Yeah, notice, since it's in Cuba, the United States didn't report on it at all. These are European reports. And European are sensitive, and Chinese reports. The previous one was a Chinese report from Central America. Americans north of the border, that is the United States citizens, generally don't connect what goes on in Central America with what's hitting our own country. And in fact, we're getting a very interesting response in Central America to this crisis, which is both a extreme weather crisis and a political crisis. Take a look.
Guatemala City, and the vanguard of the migrant caravan. The youngest and strongest have made it here first. Many more trail far behind. Thousands of Hondurans are fleeing the violence and hunger of Central America. All have the same goal: head north towards the US.
I mean, we don't want to leave our country because we want to do it. It's because there's nothing here for us. Crime also forces us to leave.
The US president thinks otherwise. Donald Trump claims the caravan itself is full of criminals.
Okay, full of criminals. No doubt the children are criminals by association. In any case, it's very clear that, as The Guardian in England picked up, there's a very strange understanding of the climate issues on the part of our
We're not
president.
denying climate change, but it could very well go back. You know, we're talking about over
that's
millions
denying
of
it.
years. They say that we had hurricanes that were far worse than what we just had with Michael.
Who says that? They say. You mean the
People
people on the
say,
phone?
people say that in the...
Yeah, but what about the
nine-
scientists who say it's worse than ever?
You have to show me the scientists because they have a very big political agenda.
Do you believe that the Russians interfered in the 2016 campaign, election?
Well, they meddled. But I think China meddled too.
But
And I
why do
think
you
other
say
countries-
China
And
meddled
you want to
too?
know something
Why
else?
do you say China? Why don't you
Let
just
me
say
ask
the
you.
Russians meddled?
Because I think China meddled also. And I think, frankly, China
This
is
is
a
amazing.
bigger problem.
You're diverting the whole Russian
I'm
thing.
not doing
You are,
anything.
you
I'm
are.
saying Russia, but I'm also saying China.
I'm
I say
gonna
I
run
did
your-
it, let's make a big
I'm going to
deal.
run your answer, but you did it 4 times.
Yes, diverting the issue 4 times, talking as if China were the issue. Well, it's really quite extraordinary because he repeats himself again and again, and she, in effect, is scolded for
I'm
asking
not
the
denying
question.
climate change, but it could very well go back. You know, we're talking about
Well,
over
that's
millions
denying
of
it.
years. They say that we had hurricanes that were far worse than what we just had with Michael.
Who says that? They say. You mean the
People
people on
say,
the phone?
people say that in the
Yeah, but what about the
nine-
scientists who say it's worse than ever?
You'd have to show me the scientists because they have a very big political agenda. I'm
So-
just telling you that you treated me much differently on the subject.
I disagree, but I don't want to have that fight with you.
Hey,
All right,
it's
we're having
okay.
another fight with you.
Leslie, it's okay. In the
All right.
meantime, I'm president and you're not.
Right. In the meantime, I'm president and you're not. That's the way to respond to a question from a journalist. Shut them up. In the meantime, I'm president and you're not. By implication, what he's saying is, therefore, since I'm president and make the laws of nature do not count anymore. Only the laws that we pass count, and only the laws that we get passed by people we like. It's pretty extraordinary. Take a look at his comments. It's really amazing.
So we have the worst laws in the history of the world because we don't have a big enough majority. We have great people standing behind me. We could write up the laws in a half an hour. You'd have the greatest laws that would stop all the problems. Problem is, we need support. We could have laws drawn in 1 hour or less. They're already drawn to solve every one of these problems. But we can't get the Democrats. That's why I hope Republicans get out and vote and give us majorities where we can do what we have to do.
Do what we have to do. They already have the laws. They're already written up. They can write them, as it were, in less than an hour, right? What we need is more Republicans so that we can pass the laws and then do what we have to do. But he has no clue as what he's got to do in reference to climate change. Unbelievable. What he does instead is lash out and threaten sanctions.
President Trump's threatening to sanction the government of Honduras unless it halts a caravan of thousands of migrants who are crossing Guatemala towards Mexico and bound for the U.S. border. Trump tweeted Monday, "The United States has strongly informed the president of Honduras that if the large caravan of people heading to the U.S. is not stopped and brought back to Honduras, no money or aid will be given to Honduras effective immediately." Trump's threat came as Guatemalan authorities arrested and deported Bartolo Fuentes, a former Honduran lawmaker who helped organize the migrant caravan of up to 3,000 people. Ahead of his arrest, Fuentes said Trump had allied with the corrupt government of Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez.
In Honduras, Trump has a corrupt government. It should sanction Honduras for condemning these people to misery, for forcing them to live in a situation of violence. And Trump has a corrupt government, a usurper who took part in a colossal fraud. The Honduran government knows this perfectly well. They who have murdered people on the street. A criminal government supported by Trump provokes this migration.
A criminal government supported by Trump provokes the migration because of the conditions accentuated, not entirely caused, but accentuated by Hurricane Michael and other natural disasters which are being unleashed because of climate change. Trump doubles down. Very, very interesting.
In immigration news, a migrant caravan of about 4,000 Hondurans is continuing its journey toward the U.S. border as the migrants flee rampant violence and economic deprivation. Trump has lashed out against the caravan on Twitter, attacking at turns Democrats, his Central American counterparts, and the migrants. Trump has also threatened to cut foreign aid to Central American countries, nullify the new U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade deal if Mexico doesn't stop the migrants migrants and even deploy troops to close the border. The United States faced widespread criticism last year for backing the re-election of Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez despite allegations of widespread election fraud.
Yes, well, that's the foreign policy. Back these guys because you can hope that they can contain the migrants coming from their countries. It's extended in a threat to Mexico.
For our top story this hour, we are monitoring developments surrounding the U.S.-Mexico border as President Trump threatens to call in the military to secure the crossing. Early Thursday morning, the president tweeted, quote, "I must, in the strongest of terms, ask Mexico to stop this onslaught. And if unable to do so, I will call up the U.S. military and close our southern border." The tweet came in reference to the migrant caravan, which is making its way from Honduras with the goal of reaching Tijuana, a Mexican city near the U.S. border. An estimated 4,000 people are traveling on the caravan, many of them children. The group Pueblo Sin Fronteras has organized caravans like this every year since 2010. Once arriving at the border, migrants go through the process of illegally crossing into the United States and applying for asylum. The families are...
I am fleeing my country due to the violence in the government, who has already killed my father and my 2 brothers after I denounced their corruption.
The families are fleeing gang and drug cartel violence back home as well. According to the U.S. State Department, since 2010, Honduras had one of the highest murder rates in the world. On Wednesday, In Question explained how the U.S. has contributed to the migrant crisis, examining how Washington's policies fuel violence and devastation in Sudan, El Salvador, and Haiti. Honduras is no exception. Just last year, the U.S. endorsed the re-election of Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez, even after the Organization of American States declared vote results to be inconclusive. And although Honduras is a U.S. partner in the drug war, which many blame for the violence in the country, President Trump threatened the nation on Thursday, saying, quote, "We have today informed the countries of Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador that if they allow their citizens or others to journey through their borders and up to the United States with the intention of entering our country illegally, all payments made to them will stop."
Okay, now you can get the foreign policy implications of it, and it's all being drummed up a week before elections with the kind of hardcore support Trump expects from people who are excited about borders. If you actually look into the fact-checking of any of his statements about climate, he's been proved again wrong and wrong, especially in reference to this new climate report that came out this last week from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Others have emphasized, like the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, that this report doesn't even go far enough. Climate report understates the threat, according to the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. And Dr. Richard Alley, one of the leading climate scientists in America, has said, in effect, there's a horrifying possibility of 15 to 20 feet sea level rise, not just a 1 to 3 feet or 1 meter rise that's expected by the end of the century. Now, others have pointed out that we need a revolutionary change.
As we reported earlier, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is a consortium of climate scientists, announced today that if the world community doesn't reduce carbon emissions drastically, millions of people across the planet will suffer dire consequences. But as William Brangham reports, heeding that warning now is a daunting challenge.
The UN's latest report, put together by over 90 authors and editors from over 40 countries, is probably the starkest, most dire warning yet about the severity of climate change and the cost of inaction. The report says that unless the world immediately begins reducing the burning of coal and oil and gas that drive up global temperatures, the world will suffer tremendous consequences. By as early as 2040, just 22 years from now, the UN says global food supplies will be threatened by increasing droughts and heat waves. Low-lying nations could be flooded by rising sea levels, potentially triggering huge flows of refugees.
Right. huge flows of refugees, which are already starting, coming in the thousands. We've been warned about the myopia of our president's leadership for years now. Time magazine carried a thing back in 2016 about this. It was pretty extraordinary. But now it's much more important than just American presidential politics. The question is, can the human community survive this kind of public leadership in the 21st century? In addition, it's now apparent that the problem of public leadership is not just with a single figure. Activists have actually started to sue the government before Trump was president. They started to sue the Obama administration for not acting on climate change. The appeals court ruled that they could sue the U.S. government. But what's happened recently? Well, there's a new Supreme Court now. And the Supreme Court has halted the youth climate case after Trump's effort to kill the suit. It's pretty extraordinary. The international community is responding to this collapse of public leadership. For years, Rhodes Scholars have warned of the dramatic transformations required by the global climate crisis. And as it turns out, perhaps in result of that kind of demand from Rhodes Scholars, there's going to be next weekend an inaugural Schwarzman-Rhodes Symposium in Oxford, specifically addressing this question of public leadership in the 21st century. Ethical, global, local, and connected. There seems to be a growing anxiousness about the collapse of public leadership around the world as people begin to convene and see what can be done about this. It's not a trivial issue because starting tomorrow you can sort of key into it. Oxford is beginning to do a blitz of study and public lectures on these issues. The Oxford Martin School on Monday the 29th is holding a global lecture for anyone to log in and listen to. It starts at 8 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time in America from our very own Christiana Figueres, who was head of the IPCC for years. She asked the question, what now? Next step on climate change. Log on tomorrow morning, 8:30 a.m. You can get the global webcast from the Oxford Martin School. Now, young people have pointed this out for years. In fact, if you look at it, young people have ranked climate change as the most serious issue facing the world today. Now that's particularly interesting because the depiction of the world's financial centers and the trillions that would be lost on Wall Street seems to appeal to the financial market, not the hundreds of millions of people displaced and moving in migration. The youth, though, are focusing specifically on the crisis.
Let's print out the summary of those reports, and we would love for you to join a lot of people across the globe in taking those reports to those targets and culprits that need to change their behaviors.
Beyond 1.5, the damages would become increasingly catastrophic, leaving millions of people suffering from hunger, diseases, floods, and water shortages.
at an unprecedented point in history where the science is very clear about what climate change is doing.
1.5 degrees centigrade equals no more fossil fuels. The children of the international community, the youth, are very clear about this. This is why a new kind of citizen science alliance is emerging around the world to work together to devise a just transition to a sustainable future.